They told you sex was a sin, or a game, a private indulgence, something to chase in secret or flaunt in public, but never revere, never touch with sacred hands. What if almost everything you believed about sex was a lie? From the moment you could understand language, the programming began. Sex became a subject too taboo for dinner tables, too shameful for schools, too dangerous for spiritual circles. Your parents, your teachers, even your friends, they weren't trying to deceive you. They simply passed down what was passed to them. Scripts written not by wisdom, but by systems. And those systems understood something you were never told. That sexual energy, when truly awakened, doesn't just ignite desire. It unlocks you. It opens the doors to your highest consciousness, your deepest truth. It is not just the force that creates life, it's the force that can awaken it. That is why it was buried. Long before governments, corporations, and organized religion, there were traditions that knew the secret. Ancient spiritual paths, from tantric mystics in India to Taoist sages in China to priesthoods of old Egypt, honored sexual energy as sacred technology. A current of raw life force, not meant to be suppressed, but transmuted, not shamed, but worshipped. But power fears sovereignty. A person who understands their own sacred energy becomes harder to control. They stop seeking approval. They stop buying distractions. They become whole, and systems built on your disconnection cannot profit from wholeness. So they twisted it, rewrote the teachings, wrapped sex in silence, shame, and control. Religions reframed desire as something sinful. Holiness became abstinence. Celibacy was sold as virtue. Yet what they never told you is that suppressed energy doesn't vanish. It festers, it distorts, it seeks out unhealthy expression, and society feeds off that imbalance. Later, media picked up where religion left off. You were bombarded with hypersexualized imagery, not to liberate your desire, but to trap it, to commercialize it, to sell it back to you in the form of products, performances, and empty stimulation. Sex was no longer sacred, it was transactional. Pleasure was sold to you, but fulfillment was hidden. You were taught to crave bodies, not connection, to chase release, not reverence, to see intimacy as conquest, not communion. All the while, something inside you kept whispering, "There's more, and there is." Because what they hid from you is that sexual energy is not just physical, it is your spiritual core, the essence that connects you to creativity, vitality, even the divine itself. In ancient teachings, this energy was revered, cultivated, transmuted. Through sacred practices, breathwork, movement, and devotion, lovers were guided not toward climax, but toward transcendence, toward oneness. Sex wasn't performance, it was prayer. It wasn't shameful, it was sacred. The deeper tragedy is this: you were never told the truth, and so you grew up chasing fragments. You learned to fear your own power, and that fear, that disconnection, made you easier to guide, manipulate, and distract. But awareness is the beginning, and once you see the chains, you can begin to break them. There is a revolution happening quietly, one that isn't televised or taught in institutions. It's an awakening of the self, a remembering. You were never meant to be ashamed of your desire. You were never meant to be sold your own energy back to you. You were born with access to the divine, and that power has always lived inside you, waiting to be reclaimed. The silence around sacred sexuality wasn't accidental. It was constructed. It served a purpose. Because once you suppress something as potent as sexual energy, you suppress the essence of life itself. Not just your ability to feel pleasure, but your ability to feel deeply, to create, to rise beyond what you've been told is possible. Throughout history, civilizations have risen and fallen on the backs of this knowledge. Those who understood it ascended. Those who lost it collapsed into control, conquest, and chaos. In the temples of ancient Egypt, sacred union wasn't whispered, it was celebrated. The myth of Isis and Osiris wasn't just a story of love, it was a code, a symbol of masculine and feminine energies merging to restore wholeness to a broken world. The rituals held behind veils of secrecy were not about indulgence, they were about awakening. In the tantric schools of India, sexual energy was not feared, it was revered. Lovers practiced not to achieve orgasm, but to reach divine union. Every movement, every breath, every gaze was an act of presence, a mirror reflecting the cosmos itself. Not performance, but participation in something timeless. The Taoists, too, saw the dance. They mapped energy through meridians, studied the flow of Jing, Qi, and Shen. To them, sex was not a depletion, it was a refinement, a circulation of life force that could heal, nourish, and elevate. These were not superstitions, they were systems, deliberate, refined, precise. So what happened? Why were these teachings buried? Because a sovereign being, connected to their own power, does not seek external approval. They are not easily governed. They are not perpetually hungry for what systems sell. Control requires disconnection, so the temples were torn down, the priesthoods scattered, the practices erased, diluted, or turned into taboos, and in their place, institutions of doctrine, rules written not to elevate, but to suppress. Sex became dangerous, not because of its nature, but because of its power, and so it was caged, taught as either a moral failure or a marketing tool, stripped of its sanctity, drenched in guilt or turned into spectacle. And now, we inherit the fragments. Porn on one side, prudishness on the other, desire sold in ads and then shamed in schools, a society confused, distracted, disconnected. But beneath that noise, the truth has never died. It waits, quietly, for remembrance. And that's what this is, not a rebellion, a return. But even a return requires courage, because the path to sacred power is lined with layers of conditioning, of shame, of unspoken wounds we've inherited from generations who forgot. When sexual energy is suppressed, it doesn't vanish, it mutates. It becomes anxiety, depression, addiction, obsession. It seeps into the cracks of your identity, disguising itself as craving, as neediness, as escapism. The more disconnected you are from your sacred energy, the more you reach outward to feel whole. You chase relationships that mirror your wounds. You seek pleasure that numbs rather than nourishes, and you wonder why nothing ever feels like enough. This is by design. The system thrives when you're unfulfilled. It needs you to keep scrolling, consuming, comparing, craving. It cannot profit from a sovereign being rooted in their own source. That's why it engineered an entire culture of distorted desire. The advertising industry learned long ago, sex sells. But what sells isn't real intimacy, it's illusion. Airbrushed bodies, shallow seduction, emotional vacancy. They don't want you to awaken, they want you to ache, because ache keeps you obedient. The entertainment world feeds you scripts. Love is drama, sex is conquest, intimacy is risky, vulnerability is weakness. You internalize the stories without noticing, and over time, you live them. But perhaps no tool has been more insidious than pornography. An endless loop of stimulation with no soul, high dopamine, low connection, a practice of disembodiment that trains you to separate pleasure from presence. It promises release, but delivers emptiness. Each click fragments you further, until intimacy becomes a performance, not a communion, until bodies become objects, until you forget how to feel. None of this is accidental, because a person who truly feels cannot be controlled. A person who knows their worth does not need constant affirmation. A person who sees their body as sacred does not desecrate it for approval. So, how do we begin to remember? First, by slowing down, feeling instead of fleeing, touching our own skin as if it were divine, relearning intimacy not as performance, but as presence. Then, by becoming curious. Where do your beliefs about sex come from? Who taught you to feel ashamed? What part of you still clings to those scripts, and are they really yours? You begin to rewrite the story. You realize that sexual energy isn't something you earn through attractiveness or approval. It's yours. It's your birthright. It lives in your breath, your hips, your heart. It is not limited to intercourse. It is the pulse of creation within you. In sacred traditions, this pulse had many names: Kundalini, Jing, Shakti, life force. And when awakened, it doesn't just bring pleasure, it brings clarity, purpose, power. But awakening is not instant, nor is it comfortable. It stirs what has been buried: trauma, shame, grief. All the parts of you that have long been locked away start to surface, not to punish you, but to be integrated. You cannot transcend what you refuse to face. And so the journey becomes one of embodiment. You learn to hold yourself, to breathe through discomfort, to soften into sensation rather than escape it. This is the real alchemy, turning pain into power, contraction into expansion. True sacred sexuality isn't about learning to perform, it's about learning to feel again, to become so deeply attuned to your own being that pleasure becomes prayer and intimacy becomes revelation. You become your own temple. This is where the illusion ends, because once you feel even a fraction of your true power, your sacred, sensual, sovereign energy, you cannot unfeel it. You begin to see the matrix unravel. The ads lose their grip. The shame dissolves like smoke in sunlight. You realize the cage was never locked. You were taught to sit quietly inside it. Now you stand. You walk differently, speak differently. You see others not as objects or threats, but as reflections, beings on their own path to remembrance. And that's how the shift begins. Not through revolutions of violence, but through inner awakenings, one by one, a quiet uprising of hearts returning home to themselves. When enough people do this, when enough remember who they truly are, the system cannot hold. The machine depends on your amnesia. It relies on your craving, your guilt, your compliance. But a person in communion with their sacred energy is not compliant. They are clear, they are connected, they are unstoppable. And now, so are you. This is your invitation, not just to heal, but to rise, to touch yourself with reverence, to meet others with presence, to unlearn everything you were told about what it means to be sensual, sexual, whole. This is not about perfection, it's about permission, to feel fully, to desire without shame, to treat your body not as something to fix or flaunt, but as a sacred vessel of the divine. When we return to the truth of sacred sexuality, we return to each other, to real love, to unity. And when we do that, no system built on disconnection can survive. This is your power. It was never lost, only forgotten. Now, remember, the temple has always been within you, and it's open. But let's go even deeper. The collective awakening of sacred sexual energy is not just a spiritual rebellion, it is a global recalibration. When millions begin to reconnect with this energy, we don't just change ourselves, we begin to change reality itself. Because sexual energy is not isolated, it's not confined to bedrooms or tantra circles, it's a frequency that permeates all of creation. It's in how we speak, how we create, how we walk through the world. It's the source of art, of beauty, of birth, of visions turned into form. When this current flows freely, our societies evolve. Love becomes more than romance. Connection becomes more than conversation. Leadership becomes more than authority. It becomes embodied presence. And this is what the system truly fears, because a world filled with sovereign beings who are rooted in their bodies, attuned to their desires, and connected to their divinity, is a world that cannot be ruled through fear. It is a world that cannot be manipulated through lack. It is a world that creates, heals, regenerates. This is why the teachings were hidden. This is why they were banned. Not because they were false, but because they were true, dangerously true. So now, you face a choice. Do you return to sleep, or do you step through the veil? If you do, everything begins to change. Not instantly, not without discomfort, but deeply and irreversibly. You begin to build your life not on scarcity, but on sensation. You learn to listen to your body, not as a problem to be solved, but as a compass pointing home. You start to attract relationships that mirror your essence, not your wounds. You express your truth without needing permission. You realize the sacred is not something to reach for. It is something to reveal. And you begin to trust, deeply, unshakably, that you are not broken. You never were. You were simply disconnected. Now you're reconnected, and nothing will ever be the same. So yes, this is a revolution, but it's a revolution of presence, of embodiment, of remembering that your pleasure, your power, and your peace were never separate. They are the same current, waiting to be lived. Live it.